Okay, everyone. So we'll just continue this a little bit, and I'll try to be brief. We'll look at some of the strikes themselves, just so you have some examples. Perhaps the one that gains the public's attention the most in the earlier time period, so before 1900, is the Great Railroad Strike of 1877. And this happens on the B&O Railroad. It is a huge strike because it spreads. It starts at one location and then it continues and continues and continues. It's really railroad workers that are protesting unfair wage cuts. And in our day and age, we do still see wage cuts or maybe employees who are told they can't have a raise in a particular year because a company didn't do very well. Maybe bonuses get cut and various things like that. But it was pretty typical for corporations to change workers' wages depending on how they were doing. And so wages would often go up and down, and that was always something that was contentious. This particular strike ended up being very violent. There was a great deal of property damage done by the strikers. And of course, a lot of the strikes occurred in various places where there was just a lot of, local resentment of some of the railroad companies. Workers, of course, with Taylorism, with the lack of wages. A lot of this was about, workers' lack of control, lack of sense of power, and really feeling exploited by these large corporations. And a lot of times this boiled over into strikes that ended up being violent. However, at this point in 1877, we don't really see large-scale union leadership so that there is a lot of organization to this particular strike. It's like almost an effort at signaling, different groups of people, noting that, these labor concerns are really, kind of important. There is also a federal government crackdown on the strikes, and the strikes are completely put down by the federal government. And this becomes like notable to employers, these corporations who are largely going to call on either federal government, national government. Sometimes local police become friendly to the strikers. So sometimes it's the federal government that's called to come in and oust some of the strikers. So that becomes, something that we see. There is an extraordinary number of strikes. Okay, so you can kind of see between 1870 and 1900 where there's pink, and you can see like in the areas of New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Ohio, New York State, there become an excessive number of strikes, and the major strikes, and a lot of these are in the hotbed of labor, which is Pennsylvania. It's an area where steel mills as well as mining as well as the railroads have a really significant role. So one thing to note is there is this increase in unions, and some of the unions we can categorize a little bit. In 1869, it really takes some time for this union to get off the ground. There is what's known as a kind of a broad union, the Knights of Labor. It includes a variety of workers, skilled and unskilled workers. It's fairly inclusive. Different groups of workers can be included. And the idea is to use strikes in order for workers to experience, getting the payback from the strikes. There's maybe almost 1 million members by 1886. And it has like a lifespan. It's going to increase and then ultimately decrease. It will get a bad rap for being involved in violence, and some people will start to attach, members of the public will start to attach union activity with radical activity. We've seen groups, in our own lifetime get labeled as radical, for example. And so this public perception of unions includes, in some cases, attacks of anarchy or communism or things like that. The Haymarket Massacre is one of the things that uh, the Knights of Labor get involved in, and it is one of the big events that actually lends itself to their decline. There is first a strike. There's a large strike at McCormick Reaper, which is a company that makes farm equipment, mechanized farm equipment, and it grows rapidly in the time period of the late 1800s. And there is a strike, and during the strike, police and other military are called, it's mostly police, come to the site and try to suppress the strike. and it creates a great deal of angst about the role of the police versus labor. And so there's a large protest at Haymarket Square in Chicago. A couple thousand people gather, and it's mostly workers. And for the most part, it was a peaceful strike for some time. Toward the end of the strike, police show up, and this is a protest, which is kind of about police brutality in a sense during the strike, and things get very violent. Somebody throws a bomb. It's not clear who actually did it, but police officers are killed, and then police also respond, and so workers are killed. By the end of the night, there's a large number of people who are killed, many people injured, and 8 people are brought to charges on, being charges that they have created this violence, that they threw the bomb. You can see a sense of the union membership here. If you look at the date of the Haymarket massacre, you can see that the Knights of Labor are going to decline rapidly. They are attached to the 8 individuals, a few of whom are hanged, and then there's 4 that are actually pardoned by a local governor, and that decision becomes very controversial. But the 4 who were hanged, likely did not throw the bomb. They happened to be political dissenters who maybe had strong political views, but didn't necessarily, have any relationship to the violence. Again, it's not clear who threw that bomb. Another union that we'll look at is on the right, the American Federation of Labor. This is going to be a group that's much less interested in creating strikes as the tool to actually backlash and to create changes. And we can see a slower start for the American Federation of Labor, but over the long run, the American Federation of Labor will grow. It's an organization that's merged with another one and is still around today. The AFL-CIO is still an organization. And the public opinion about labor unions, and you see this on the right, these are the 8 or so people who were involved or alleged to be involved in the Haymarket massacre, and they are known as the anarchists, and this is controversial for some time. This is also going to be a time in history we're headed toward kind of the first Red Scare in American history, where there becomes this sense that political views that are anti-patriotic become very problematic, and throughout the early 1900s, which is leading up to the time period of the Russian Revolution, this particular stigma about anarchism, socialism, communism creates a lot of issues related to violence and also suppression of speech and things like that. The American Federation of Labor, which is an alternative union to the Knights of Labor, it's organized very differently. It's sometimes called a craft union. What this is an association of smaller unions. So you might have like the steel workers, another group of workers, the railroad card workers, a variety of different industrial groups that are organized by the industry that they're attached to. And they have very specific orders and needs and membership that relate to that particular industry. But together, they're kind of allied in a group that's including all of their numbers. This is a much more exclusive type of union, and it's important to notice that nativism at this time was extraordinary, high immigration numbers to the United States at this time, and this is really going to exclude Black workers, women workers, a variety of other workers, especially unskilled workers, which excludes a lot of new immigrants to the United States. So this is really kind of skilled white men in many cases who are families of immigrants, but not necessarily first-generation immigrants. And we see kind of this role for the American Federation of Labor. Sam Gompers is the leader, and he becomes a pretty significant figure. And the way in which the American Federation of Labor goes about seeking changes, they have a few demands, and the demands are very specific. One is higher wages. That's something that they seek and initially don't really get far. Higher wages doesn't necessarily become what the AFL is going to end up doing. However, the 8-hour workday, typically a lot of workers worked about 12-hour days, 6 days a week, and there were no laws or regulations that minimized the number of hours that somebody could work. So the 8-hour day, and the chant was, 8 hours of work, 8 hours of rest, and 8 hours for what we will. This idea of leisure was becoming really significant and demanded. And the American Federation of Labor was pretty successful in generating political protection for an 8-hour day. And they're also looking for better working conditions. And largely, the difference in what this group is seeking is very particular legislation at the state and federal level. So this becomes a group that has like the ear of politicians. Sam Gompers is spending most of his days hanging out with senators, trying to convince them to change laws. So this is where we see the start of groups of workers appealing to the government, for the purpose of trying to meet the demands of the workforce. And, there's a variety of different essays that are penned, what a working man wants. And, Sam Gomper's argument is that not only is this good for the workers, but it's good for society. And there's an allegation that people who have too much leisure time are going to use it. They're going to, drink at the saloon, and they're not going to use their leisure time well. And Gomper suggests otherwise. It's time for community development. It's time for, activities that help the society thrive, not just the workplaces. Homestead strike, I think you have a good working knowledge of this from the debate. It involves Andrew Carnegie, who's off-site. He's like not even involved at all in the Homestead Mill. He's left kind of this white-collar manager figure, Henry Clay Frick, who goes about reducing wages. This creates tensions and a large-scale lockout. People are brought in to replace the workers, and this is where the Pinkertons protect the new workers, and there's going to be an all-out battle. Even though the workers largely win, they atrociously take down some of the Pinkertons. In the long run, the workers lose very significantly. Homestead becomes a situation where strikers, look like violent radicals, that maybe they would do anything, and the National Guard gets called in to stop the violence, reopen the plant. Ultimately, Carnegie does suffer some damages from this. There's a lot of, calls for hypocrisy. He was somebody who was outspoken about worker rights, and all of a sudden he's supporting Henry Clay Frick. Frick is almost killed by a socialist at the time. So there's a lot of outpouring of this, but in the long run, the Homestead strike doesn't really change the conditions for the laborers. And we get a sense from this cartoon, this is kind of the Pinkertons, who are protecting the workplace, not for the workers, but protecting the corporation. So is the McKinley tariff. It appeals like it looks like this is a protected site and good for workers. But of course, workers are receiving this notice that they're losing their wages, and workers are really the victims in this situation. The Pullman strike, and this is another one just to note, it's in 1894, and it's significant for a couple of reasons. Not only is it a really large strike, but it happens in what's called a company town. So the Pullman Railroad Car Company, George Pullman, who owns this company, creates this large town, and everyone who lives in the town works for the company. And people aren't actually paid in cash, they're paid in script, and the script is then used to pay rent and to pay, for goods in the Pullman store. There's a Pullman school. Like the entire community is just like being like your whole life is involved in the corporation. There's very little privacy, and everything is organized around this script that you get, and then you don't have choices in what you can consume. Everything is in this town. Workers see their script actually falling, so they aren't able to get as much in the company town, and they go on strike. And it leads to a lot of sympathy strikes. Railroads all across the country end up striking as well. So it's a massive strike. The government has to put it down. But it also leads to a bunch of arrests. This is actually a picture of Pullman. It's in Ohio, so you can get a sense of this idea of a company kind of creating an entire town, based on their needs. And this is an author saying, we're born in a Pullman house, fed from a Pullman shops, taught in a Pullman school, and so on. We're going to go to Pullman hell. And Eugene Debs, who is an individual who is arrested, he is like a worker agitator, somebody who becomes a leader in the labor movement. He is arrested and thrown in jail. The federal government intervenes in the strike on the basis that the railroad stoppage is interfering with mail delivery. So the federal government enjoins the strike, shuts down the strike. Eugene Debs is arrested and becomes pretty much a socialist and becomes a leader in the American